Welcome to the session Designing with Mental Health in Mind. If you are joining us online, please place your questions in the Q&A panel rather than the chat panel, as chat will not be moderated. For attendees here in the room, please hold your questions until the end of the session. We'll try to get to as many as possible. If we don't get to them, some presenters will join the chat and try to answer questions individually. Today, we are very excited to have Dr. Michelle Saint with us. Dr. Michelle Saint is an assistant teaching professor at Arizona State University, as well as a licensed associate counselor within the state of Arizona. Today, she's here to discuss some techniques to improve accessibility with regards to mental health in the classroom, to build a course that is not just more compassionate for everyone involved, but also promotes academic justice. Please welcome Dr. Saint.
Hey there. I'm going to put a timer on my phone too. For this, thinking in part about how you make classes accessible for those with psychiatric disabilities. One of the particular challenges is that a lot of times mental health concerns show up for a very short amount of time and unexpectedly. Part of thinking about mental health when you're designing a course or thinking about like putting together materials is designing things with the expectation that the individuals who will be most affected may not know that they will be affected until things are pretty dire and they need a substantial help. And also keeping in mind that while there are people with psychiatric disabilities, there are a whole lot more people who are affected in some ways regarding mental health. And especially when real world circumstances are anxiety provoking, there are going to be a lot more people who are in some way having difficulties. So let's get this. Yeah. So 2 recommended texts. I just wanted to highlight these because I really like them. Asao Inoue's book, it's available online. If you do a search for Inoue and labor-based grading contracts, it'll come up. This is not about mental health accessibility or disability in general, but it's something that I think is really worth looking at. Inoue has a new book as of 2023 that is specifically about grading for anti-racism with consideration of disability as well. But I haven't had a chance to read through it yet, so I didn't add that one. And then this article, Smith's Indigenous Pedagogies for Burnt Out Students on a Burned Out Planet, that also should be available if you do a search just for the name. And this is just an article that goes through a lot of ways in which mental health is a major consideration for all of the students who come to any sort of academic location. So I just really like these, and I'm using a lot of principles from both of these sources because I like them. All right, so certain assumptions that I make and that I think are relevant to designing for mental health and which I hope you'll be willing to accept. So first of all, I believe, and I think that it is reasonable to say that psychological distress is best interpreted as a product of external conditions rather than some internal disorder. Now, there are some individuals who have psychiatric disabilities where we can pinpoint factors associated with their neurology or the chemical composition of their brain, and we can say, that is a disorder. Even in those sorts of circumstances, how that collection of neurology, how those brain chemicals end up affecting things is determined by the surrounding circumstances, by what is actually going on in the world. So if we are interested in minimizing psychological distress, if we are interested in encouraging as much as we can mental health, it is worthwhile for us to start with the assumption that the environment students are in is what will matter, rather than thinking about anything going on within the student. Second assumption, the environment students inhabit in order to learn are distressing. I'll say a little bit more about this in a little bit, but the idea here is that the circumstances we put students in, the classroom setting, the university setting, especially given the way that upper education works in our society, is a very, very reasonable source of distress. The environment itself is doing a lot to diminish mental health for those who are involved. And then the final assumption that I have just kind of as a background and that I'm taking from anyway, and which I believe is worth thinking about in your design is no one can learn more than they can learn. And for any particular student, no matter like what circumstance you're talking about, no matter what you do, there are going to be things going on with that student that determine what they are in a position to really benefit from, how they are able to take in information and do stuff with it. And so when you're designing a course, it is especially important to keep in mind that you don't have control over what students take from it. You do not have the ability to say students will learn this because you don't know that. And so part of designing for mental health, I think, is recognizing that what any student can learn is what that student can learn, and there are limitations to how you can affect that. Cool. All right. So now thinking about secondary education as distressing, I don't think I'm saying anything too novel here. And in general, I don't think I'm saying anything very revolutionary or groundbreaking. I think that this just might be a way of like summarizing a number of different factors about accessibility and letting us think about it in terms of mental health. College is very, very expensive. And students are coming into our university setting with this huge financial burden over them, which is something that is relevant to how they understand what they do and how they are functioning within their environment. Also, the stakes of it closely related to the cost. A lot of students coming into college do not feel that they have any opportunity for failure. What they are thinking about is the entirety of their future. And there are a whole lot of ways in which upper education reinforces this idea that students have this opportunity to set themselves up for life. And if they blow it, then things are gone. That is terrifying. That is hard to deal with. Also, there are a lot of ways in which the college environment reinforces a devaluation of self-care. Now, when you're talking about in-ground class systems like ASU, where you have a lot of students, especially between like ages 18 and 21, a lot of those students are not at home with parents for the first time in their lives. And so a lot of the scaffolding that was socially in place to encourage self-care is suddenly gone. And so a lot of students in the 18 to 21 age range are in the position where they are having to learn how to take care of themselves while also being in this incredibly challenging educational environment. Beyond that, there are a lot of ways in which the culture of upper education reinforces the idea that you should not focus on self-care. The concept of an all-nighter is a horrible one in terms of your well-being. The way in which alcohol use and other substance use is discussed and maintained, the way in which, you can imagine what the college experience is like. A lot of students are not in a position to recognize how to engage in self-care or that it is worthwhile to do so. Now, beyond that in particular age range and college experience, you're going to see a lot of other students who are devaluing their self-care. So take someone who is in an online class and they are currently working full-time in order to support their family, and they have children, and also now they are a college student because they want to improve their future opportunities and whatnot. That is someone who has so many different stressors on top of them that they are likely going to think it as necessary to put their individual psychological well-being last out of all of their different priorities. And so it's a different type of context that will affect how they approach self-care, but also there are a lot of ways in which it will undermine their self-care. And then enforced values. In a college setting, you come into a class, the instructor gives you a syllabus, says, here are the books you're going to read, here's what you're going to do, here's how you're going to express yourself in written words, here's how I want you to express yourself out loud, care about it. So that is the imposition of a set of values and cares and concerns from an authority figure. You're being told this is how you are meant to understand the world as meaningful and the sort of work that you are supposed to do now in order to seek value as you should. And this is especially problematic because a lot of times these are alien values, in the sense that when the student comes into the classroom, they are presented with things to care about and goals to work towards that are not ones that they otherwise would have had. You assign a text to students, they're in a position of being told, care about this. And if they were not originally going to care about it, that means that they are in a position not just of having to take on what you are telling them to value, but to see it as a different set of values from their own that they have to somehow manage to work with, even at the expense of their own beliefs and values and emphasis. That, I mean, oftentimes part of what we're doing is giving students opportunities to value things that they otherwise might not have come across. But just it can be an imposition, and it can make you feel alone, unheard, and uncared for. And then this is, I don't know how I feel about this language, but a productivity fetish. This is not just in the upper education, but in our society in general. We tend to presuppose that if you are not being productive, you are not doing something of worth, or that you have to always be working, or else you're not doing well. And especially when you are doing a lot of incredibly cognitively challenging work, like in college, that's just going to burn you out. It's going to leave you with anxiety and sadness. So just, and not everything, but just some ideas. Now, some costs of distress. There's a fair amount of literature that goes through this. I just want to highlight some of them. Decreased cognitive capacity. You don't have as much brain space. Choice paralysis. It becomes harder to decide what you want to do out of a set of options. Decreased creativity. You can't problem solve in new ways. You have less cognitive plasticity. Decreased memory. Diminished concentration. Again, these are not all of them, but when you are in an environment that is distressing, that has substantial stressors that you have to deal with, you are likely to experience internal problems that directly affect your ability to learn well. And so this is not just a matter of designing for mental health for the sake of valuing our students as beings who are capable of being happy or being distressed, but also if you don't design for mental health, if you don't think about your students' mental well-being, psychological well-being in your classes, you are undermining the very opportunity for them to learn. So some basic strategies which I think are useful to keep in mind for this. You can think of this as just three kind of things to keep in mind while designing or while thinking through a course. One, promote autonomy. How do you promote autonomy for your students? Two, values clarification. I thought about putting that as values, but then I decided not to be clever. What opportunity are you giving students to clarify their own values, and what are you teaching them about values that you yourself have? And then third, build compassion. So autonomy, values, compassion. I think that those three provide a lot of useful direction in terms of how to make choices about designing a class or classroom materials. Okay, so I want to go through an example for this. Something which gets a lot of attention when you look at mental health and managing psychiatric disabilities in classrooms. There's a lot of work that has been done on content warnings, or sometimes referred to as trigger warnings. That's kind of an older term. And most of the work that I'm aware of on content warnings, I personally do not find all that good. But let's talk first, the debate around content warnings. There have been a number of very bad arguments made against providing content warnings of some sort. First, like, are you going to coddle students by protecting them from hard subjects? Yeah. So the coddling of the American mind is the title of a book that famously puts this forward. Notice what this is implying about who has power in the classroom, who is in a position to coddle, and how if you are in a classroom and you are doing something with in mind with what the student's needs might be, that's your choice as opposed to something the student gets to decide for themselves. Aren't you reinforcing that they're too weak to discuss these topics? Here we have again some assumptions about who has power and who is best positioned to have authority in the classroom, but also we have a certain claim about values, that we are putting value on a certain view of what counts as being strong, and that we as the instructor, the designer, are in a position to encourage that value regardless what the student might think about it. And if the student feels like, yeah, I don't want to do this, you're calling them weak and thus saying that they have failed to live up to the values that you rightfully say should be followed. There's no way to know what topics will be triggering. Yeah. I'm going to say that again on the next slide. But here, notice how if you think of the concept of providing students with information about what material they are likely to confront in your class as something where you're supposed to cover all of it, that is, again, you presupposing you are in the position of authority and that you are the one who has all the information and is making the choices that matter. You can't know, but that doesn't mean that, you're just like, okay, I can't do anything about it. You have a responsibility to your discipline to teach what matters. This may be true in some regards, in some ways, but if you have a student who is experiencing incredible distress in relation to a topic, they can't learn anything related to that topic. You as the instructor, as the designer, do not have the capacity to force your students to learn the way that you think they should learn. And so whatever responsibility an instructor may have to some particular discipline is irrelevant to setting up the class so the student is in the best position to take care of themselves, if that makes sense. Okay. So now let's think about these values. If we think about autonomy, values, and compassion, what do we get? So first, no, you can't know what content will be challenging for students. You can make some educated guesses in terms of just like percentage of the population and whatnot, but you don't know for sure. So don't assume you do. No, you can't decide for students what they can handle. That's not your job. And you are not in a good position to make an educated guess, especially if you are an instructor and you are not actually a content expert about psychology. Guess what? You are especially not in a good position to determine what students can handle in terms of trauma and stress and whatnot. And so what you should do is give students information to let them decide for themselves. The goal isn't to control the student's experience. You can't do that. Instead, the question is, what information can you provide to empower students? And what framework for providing that information is empowering? Values clarification in relation to content warnings. This might be especially relevant for me because I teach philosophy. I teach classes like ethics. And I teach students what's a value in some ways. And I think that it's really important that students should value themselves and their well-being. And a student's well-being matters more than any lesson I can provide in a class, especially since if a student's not doing well, like just, in terms of mental health, they probably won't get anything from the lesson I give anyways. And so in terms of thinking about how I'm teaching, I'm empowering students, and I'm also going to try to reinforce that they have value and also their value system has value itself. And is there anything more important we can try to teach students than how to take care of themselves? I asked it as a question, but I think that this is an important thing. Every time you tell students, write an essay, that is you giving them some sense of what has value, what matters. And central to the entire project of education is the student as a person who matters. And then build compassion. A big part of this is giving it space and taking time. And so part of designing for mental health, I think, in this context, in all contexts, is thinking about not just how do you meet the requirement, but instead, how do you actually shape the environment to encourage what it is you think that matters? And so that means not just saying, here's some topics we're going to discuss, take care, but instead actually thinking of this as something that affects everyone in the room. Even if there's someone in the room who has no problems with any content whatsoever, it is worthwhile for them to be aware of their environment that contains others who will likely have different needs than they do. So think of content warnings. I really hate the language of that, but that's what we got. It's not a warning, but instead try to find opportunities to acknowledge our shared vulnerabilities as human beings who have come together, and that also our capacities for fellow feeling. It is worthwhile not just for those who might have particular stressors that the rest of us don't know about, but also for those who aren't really stressed. It is worthwhile for them as well to have the opportunity to think compassionately. So I'm going to put up a content warning in 5101, giant box of text. And by the way, I'm not saying I have a good one. I've presented you with the principles that I think are worthwhile that I've tried to keep in mind, but that doesn't mean I'm doing a good job. Okay, a lot of text. So first paragraph is just basically information. There are some topics we're going to discuss that may very well be hard for you. Again, giving you information. And then the last sentence says, if you have concerns about the possibility of a topic not listed above coming up in class, you are again encouraged to contact me about it. So there's like, yeah, I don't know what's going on with you, but this is something where I will listen and I will help if I can. Next paragraph. I'll read this one. It is my intent for our discussions to be respectful and supportive, but I cannot guarantee that course content will never be hurtful. If you are concerned about your ability to succeed in a course where one or all of these topics may be raised, please let me know. If at any point in our discussions, my words or actions are hurtful or disrespectful, I invite you to contact me about this. However, you have no obligation to do so if you prefer not to. So again, this is giving the student autonomy, letting them think about how they go about thinking about their different options. And also it is making a claim that the student's values are what matter. I will never go out of my way to say something that is offensive or hurtful or whatnot, but their decision matters. And then the last bit is there as a comment about how this matters to everyone else as well. Next one, this is a lot shorter. This is in a class where we have a section on food. Eating disorders are some of the most deadly and personally costly ones. And so this subject can trigger disordered eating behaviors and cognitions. Your primary goals are to be safe and take care of yourself. And if you need an alternative topic, I've never had a student ask for an alternative, but I have anecdotes, had students tell me that because of this, they felt like they had the control over the situation and they were in a better position to go forward. Some other examples that I put up there. Now, who benefits from all of this? Everyone, of course. All accessibility measures do in fact have massive benefits for everyone. Specifically worth keeping in mind that not everyone is affected to the same extent by stressors of upper education. And students with marginalized identities, students from oppressed backgrounds are at greater risk of feeling alienated, unsupported, and overburdened. The stressors of upper education are more likely to have an effect on students who are marginalized and oppressed. And so when you design for mental health, you are designing generally for empowerment and compassion, which in turn helps to support the well-being, especially of those who are at most risk of being hurt by their environment. There you go.
Thank you so much. So we've got maybe 1 or 2 minutes for any questions. Anybody in the room have any questions? Did we have any come in online, Sarah? Okay, perfect. Well, we will hang out in this room for just another minute if anyone needs to come up and ask anything. Thank you so much for this amazing presentation. We will be talking about Ally, the accessibility checker, and Canvas in this room next, but otherwise feel free, you can run on to the next session. Thank you, everyone.